this morning. But for those of you that don't know us, we're from the Fuel Poverty Charity, who's got a keen interest in trying to eradicate fuel poverty. Today we're going to be talking about the government's consultation on the Warm Home Discount Scheme. I hope this is a policy that many of you are familiar with and act on in your daily lives to try and better assist people that are on low incomes and vulnerable to living in a cold home. It's true to say that NEA fully supports the Warm Home Discount Scheme since its inception about 10 years ago. It's provided over £1 billion in direct support for low-income pensioner households who automatically receive assistance through the core group and will receive currently £140 rebate each winter off their energy bills. That is life-changing support, and we warmly welcome that policy. Through the broader group, about the equivalent amount of low-income working age households have also been assisted, but on an opt-in basis. And again, we fully support that policy. In our practical work, NEA also delivers support through the industry initiatives, which has done a measurable work to write off fuel debts to better advise households about keeping warm, maximising their incomes, and looking to provide life-changing support for households, providing them with energy advice. We've got a packed agenda today, so I'm not going to say too much by way of introduction. But the first thing I will say is that we're recording this webinar today, so we can capture your views. So if you don't want to appear on our recording, what I would suggest is taking yourself off, taking your video off. Please just remind yourself that we are recording this, and in any participation that you make. NEA really warmly welcomes the recent consultation on the extension of the Warm Home Discount Scheme for 1 year. We know that we need longer term clarity on the scheme, and we've been campaigning alongside our partners Fair by Design to try and get the government to extend the scheme over a longer period and expand its vital role. But we do welcome the near-term consultation, the proposals that have been set out. So I'm going to hand you over now to Carl Packman from Fair by Design, our campaign partners, who's going to say a few words. Carl's head of corporate engagement at Fair by Design, and Fair by Design, as I'm sure you're aware, have done a huge amount to raise awareness of the need for the extension and expansion of the Warm Home Discount Scheme alongside our organisation, and with much support from yourselves. I'll just finally like to say thank you very much for any of you that have participated in that campaign work, in particular signing our earlier letter earlier on in the year, which helped secure the 1 year extension. But I'm going to hand you over to Carl, and then Carl will subsequently be handing over to Matt Copeland, who's our policy manager, that will take you through the details of our consultation response. I hope you find this session useful, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Carl. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and good morning to everyone. So good to see so many organisations here, and I hope you don't mind if I chip in with just a little about what this scheme and what the consultation itself means for my organisation, Fair by Design. For those who don't know, we are a campaigner, an investment fund, campaigning and investing in small startups and firms who are against the extra costs of being on a low income, so otherwise known as the poverty premium. We have a focus on essential services like financial services, insurance, but also energy. And energy has historically been the biggest contributor to the poverty premium. So I just wanted to give you an idea of why this particular consultation is very important for us. The latest unpublished evidence that we, Fair by Design, have commissioned shows that great ground has been made on the energy poverty premium, reducing people's exposure to energy-based poverty premiums. And being on the most expensive tariffs for low consumers has decreased over the last few years. That's in no small part thanks to the extension of price caps set by a regulator. However, the cost of being defaulted onto the most expensive tariffs still represents the second biggest share of the poverty premium for those who are exposed to it. We know also that elderly low-income households in particular are the least likely to be on the most appropriate and affordable household energy deals, which makes a very big difference, particularly, as we know, approaching winter months. This fact, coupled with other competing financial pressures on all households, but especially on low-income households, is why it's absolutely vital that we have schemes in place to help bills be more affordable for consumers. So the importance of the warm home discount, the consultation makes the importance of schemes like the warm home discount very clear. As Bays puts it themselves, this consultation comes at a time of unprecedented economic and social impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. The impact of COVID-19 on incomes, poverty levels, and people's ability to pay their bills are likely to be felt beyond this winter. Now, originally, like Peter just said there, we wanted to see much needed changes and reforms to the way in which the warm home discount operates and is allocated to people. But we're dealing with a very different reality to the one when we wrote our campaign document with NEA. Lots of things have changed. I don't need to tell you that. Parliament has had to concentrate efforts on immediate pandemic-related problems. So this consultation deals with the 1-year extension of the schemes. We at Fair by Design understand this. However, we maintain that the warm home discount requires reform, and we want to join in making it known that these reforms are urgent if we want to ensure more people can enjoy something which really should be a guaranteed minimum, which is a warm and comfortable home. So we're also glad to see that Bays references ways in which the warm home discount can be improved in the future, and also appreciate that they've given us the opportunity to make our thoughts as different organisations represented here as well, known about the ways in which the warm home discount can be improved in the future. So I'll just conclude by saying that our own insight at Fair by Design finds that large parts of essential services markets, including retail energy, do not always work well for the least well off, and that's an understatement. Saving money through switching energy services is the stock solution we often hear, but doesn't work for everyone for a whole variety of reasons. Digital exclusion, poor information of rights by landlords, a lack of time for those in real hardship. So schemes like the warm home discount are a real lifeline for many experiencing fuel poverty. And through the efforts and support of multiple organisations, there is guaranteed say on its continuation for 1 year at least. And that's really good news for those who stand to benefit from this rebate. So I look forward to the subsequent discussion this morning. And I'll hand over to Matt now.
Thanks, Carl. So what I'm going to do this morning is sort of step through the consultation and try and explain what Bays are proposing to do and give an NEA view of what we think of it and why. So I'm going to share my screen because I've got a presentation to sort of help do that. I hope that everyone can see it. Carl, I can see your face if you can give me a nod. Cool, good. So as I said, I'm going to step through it. I'm going to start off with some background. It's probably reiterating a little bit of what Carl and Peter have already said, but it will get us all on the same page. And then I'm going to step through the questions. If you have any questions yourselves during what I go through, I'll have the chat box up. So if you can chuck them in there, I'll address some as we go through if it's appropriate, timing wise. And if not, once I've got to the end, we'll do a little bit of Q&A with myself, Carl and Peter. And you can ask questions on the chat and we can dive deeper into a few things if that would be helpful. We're quite flexible on timings today. So I will sort of go through this and just see how long it takes. If we have gone for about an hour and we haven't had a break, then I'll enforce a 5-minute break so that we can sort of come back fresh from that. Okay, so if we go with this then. So a little bit of background on the scheme. So I'm sure you all know this, but just in case you weren't aware, the warm home discount is split into 3 different parts. So there's two parts to the rebates that Carl and Peter have been talking about. So the core group is a group of households that receive the £140 rebate automatically if their supplier has above a certain amount of customers, above 150,000 customers, and is therefore obligated to deliver the scheme. And that core group consists of households receiving the guaranteed element of pension credit. So if they're with a supplier that is part of the scheme, they don't need to do anything. They will just receive that rebate. And that's approximately, it's just over 1 million households getting that rebate automatically every year. The second half of the rebates is something called the broader group. So with the broader group, households need to apply to receive the rebate. It's not automatic. And many more households are eligible for the broader group than the core group. So it's done on a first come, first served basis. And suppliers, although there are a certain set of people they have to offer the broader group rebates to, they can go above and beyond that and offer it to other groups of customers. So it's really difficult to tell exactly how many are in that broader group, but it's certainly more than the money allows to be given. So there is a limit of approximately just over 1 million broader group rebates as it is, and that leaves at least 500,000 in the broader group without a rebate, and probably more. So core group getting it automatically, broader group having to apply, receiving on a first come, first served basis. And lastly, there's a pot of money that can be spent on something called industry initiatives. And put simply, this is where suppliers fund projects to help reduce fuel poverty. And things they can fund include things like energy advice, better benefits entitlement checks, energy efficiency measures, and debt clearance. So in a nutshell, that's what the Warm Home Discount is trying to do, trying to fund rebates back to customers to make their energy bills less, and projects more broadly to try and tackle fuel poverty. So Carl has already touched on our joint campaign, but I want to sort of reiterate before I go into the consultation what we've asked for there, and then reflect on it as we go through it. So as Carl stated, we've been campaigning to both extend and expand Warm Home Discount. And we've asked for broadly 4 things. There's a lot more in there, but at a really high level, there's sort of 4 things we really want. Firstly, that more households receive the support. So really, we want to see the whole of the broader group receive the support and it not be on a first come, first served basis. We want more to receive it automatically. We don't think it's fair that some people have to apply for it, especially when some don't get it after they qualify. We want the industry initiatives portion of the scheme to be maintained. So we don't want the expansion of the rebate part of the scheme to eat into the industry initiatives portion, because those projects providing energy advice, energy efficiency, debt clearance, and benefit entitlement checks are extremely valuable to households. And we want the level of the rebate to be at least equal to the current scheme. So we don't want those 3 things to be just achieved by reducing the level of the rebate and keeping the overall spend the same. This consultation, obviously, as Carl and Peter have already said, represents a single year extension of the scheme. We're expecting a consultation on longer terms reform to come later. We don't know whether it will be later this year or early next year, but we're hoping sooner rather than later. So whilst these 4 sort of points will be concentrated on the longer term measures, it's really important that we start feeding the messaging through in our responses to this consultation, we think. So wherever, if you're responding, wherever you can, and if you support our campaign, then please try and build these messages into your responses. So this consultation. So as I said, they're consulting on a single year extension to the scheme. They're planning to increase the scheme envelope with inflation. They're planning to maintain the rebates part of the scheme pretty much as is, so £140 to the core group and £140 to the broader, to the first million or so in the broader group that are on a first come first served basis. They're going to make small changes, or they're proposing to make small changes to industry initiatives. And there are some other small changes which I'll go through as well. And just so you're all aware, the deadline for responding is the 11th of November. I've got a link to the consultation at the bottom there, and you'll get all these slides in a PDF document after we've finished today. So the themes, we've got three themes of our response, which I'll take you through sort of this high level before we go into individual questions. So firstly, we think that there's a need to accelerate the wider reform of the scheme. This is sort of unsurprising. So as Carl and Peter sort of articulated, we earlier this year started our campaign with Fair by Design to sort of get this big expansion of the warm home discount so that the broader group can receive payments automatically. The data matching that would allow that has been sort of touted by government for a number of years. Since before I started at NEA in 2018, they've been talking about this. I think this is the third consultation that sort of referenced it without saying they're going to do it. So it's really important that that increase in funding comes sooner rather than later, and that the scheme, the year for the scheme after this one that they're consulting on does include the broader reforms. And just as a note, without the increase to funding that would come from that, the changes that they propose really will only be reducing activity in one area to expand activity in another. And that's a bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul, to be honest. And it risks reducing high value activity for potentially low value activity. And that's something that we'll go into later. So one of our main calls in the response is for BEIS to look at expanding the scheme for scheme year 12 and beyond. And just as a reminder, this consultation is for next winter, essentially, which is scheme year 11. So the second thing is we think the scheme must be appropriate given the levels of debt. So we know that fuel debt has risen significantly during the pandemic. And if you have had the chance to have a look at NEA's fuel poverty monitor for this year, you'll have seen that has had quite a large impact on households. So I think Citizens Advice say more than a couple of million households have fallen into arrears on their, or more than a couple of million adults have fallen into arrears on their energy bills during the pandemic. So that's over and above people who were behind on their bills before the pandemic. So there's sort of huge levels of fuel debt at the moment going into winter. So coming out of a winter when more people are staying at home, and if it's a cold winter, it being very expensive to heat your home, fuel debt could be an ever increasing problem. So BEIS have taken the opportunity to propose how the warm home discount scheme, particularly the industry initiatives part, can work to help those in fuel debt. And we agree with some of that, we disagree with some of it. And we actually think that it needs to be a small part of a larger set of actions that BEIS need to take to tackle this. And two of the big ones are something to do with a payment matching scheme where government would match payments by households to clear their utility debt to help accelerate the debt clearance, and a long-term energy efficiency strategy. So Peter touched on earlier the fact that the Green Home Grants have come out, and Green Home Grants will help people upgrade their homes in the short term, but there's very little funding beyond the 1st of April next year for energy efficiency for fuel poor households, and there needs to be that longer term strategy to reduce energy consumption in homes and to increase building efficiency. So that longer term strategy needs to be in place as well. And lastly, something that is really important is giving confidence that the scheme will actually go live on the 1st of April next year. So the current scheme ends at the end of March 2021. And the proposal is for this scheme to begin on the 1st of April 2021. But that really depends on whether the legislation that underpins it can get through Parliament as quickly as it can in order to make that date. What we saw a couple of years ago when we moved from Eco 2T to Eco 3, Eco being the energy efficiency obligation on suppliers to deliver energy savings to households. There was a delay in those regulations coming through, which did significantly slow delivery. And while there are proposals within this consultation to mitigate some of those risks, we think that might not be enough. So we believe that BEIS need to work very hard to sort of expedite this legislation as a priority to ensure that it can go live on the 1st of April. I have to say, it doesn't really have an impact on the rebate part of the scheme, because those rebates tend to happen a bit later in the year, so it would have less of an impact on the rebates. But in terms of ensuring that industry initiative projects can be set up and start running as soon as possible, it could have an impact there. So it could have an impact on real delivery of those projects I was speaking to before. And this is just an illustration of what happened in ECO. So you can see ECO 3 starts in this right-hand side, and it was meant to start in September or October the 1st, in fact. So the last quarter of 2018 saw really slow delivery of ECO, and that was mainly because the legislation was delayed and didn't go through until mid-November, so suppliers didn't really have clarity about what they were doing until then. We really want to see that not repeated within the warm home discount, so getting the legislation through is really, really important to us. Okay, that's the high level stuff. Now I'm going to go a bit more into the detail, and I'm going to go through all the questions basically that we're going to be answering in the consultation. We don't answer all of them because some of them are really specific to suppliers, but these are the ones that we're really interested in, and we're hoping that if you're responding to this as well, you'll be able to respond in a similar way to us. So first things first, we'll talk about the rebate. So as I said before, BEIS are looking to increase the overall spending envelope of the scheme in line with inflation, but they're not changing the level of the rebate, and they're not intending to change the ways in which the core group or the broader group work. That will mean that because the core group is basically paid automatically anyway, that will happen as is. The broader group will essentially, there'll be more money to go into the broader group, so more people in the broader group will get a rebate, but it will still be a first come, first serve rebate, and not everyone in the broader group will be able to receive one. And apart from that, everything else will sort of stay the same. So we agree with those proposals. They satisfy our campaign ask that more households receive a rebate, and the level of the rebate will stay at least the same as the current scheme. So that's a good thing. Obviously, it doesn't go quite as far as we want in the end game of what we want in the broader reforms, but it's a good move in that direction. And notably as well, not making significant changes at this point will help the legislation be expedited through. The more changes that are made, the more risk there is that legislation won't go through in time. So we think on balance, this is a reasonable action to take and will be positive, or a positive change in relation to what the current scheme is, so more people getting the same rebate. So now it gets a little bit more tricky. So BEIS are looking to change how industry initiatives will work to support debt write-off. So this is how the scheme currently works. There are currently a couple of provisions to provide direct financial support to households through industry initiatives. So firstly, there's something called debt write-off, where suppliers can write off an individual's debt up to a total of £6 million per year for the whole scheme across the industry. So that total has been reducing year on year. I think it has been 10, then 8, then 6. It might have been higher before then. And BEIS have previously indicated the intention to reduce it further to, I think, 4 million. And secondly, financial assistance through fuel vouchers, where through industry initiative funding, households can be given 140 quid in vouchers to keep them sort of on supply, so sort of to help them top up their prepayment meters. So that support can only currently go towards households that do not qualify for either the core or the broader group. So that's not receiving a rebate, that's qualifying through either the core or broader group. And that's to make sure that people don't receive a double rebate, essentially. However, BEIS recognised that because of the pandemic, increased debt is a problem, as I mentioned earlier, and are consulting on whether they should change the rules in light of the new situation. So there's a few things they want to do. So they want to maintain the debt write-off maximum at £6 million, excuse my typo there, with a personal maximum of £2,000. So that maintaining it at 6 million is essentially having it a couple of million higher than it otherwise would have been. And that personal maximum of £2,000 is to ensure that that debt write-off can cover more people, so that more people can get the support. And they say that if households have a household debt of more than £2,000, suppliers should be helping them through their broader license obligations anyway. So it's not that people with larger debts than that won't get support. It's just that they should be getting support in other ways. The other thing they want to do is in relation to the financial assistance via fuel vouchers. So they want to allow the core and broader group qualifying households to receive financial assistance with an overall £5 million cap. So at the moment, with the current rules, where those core and broader group households can't receive that assistance, only about £500,000 is spent on that part of the scheme. So BEIS want to open that up to more households with that £5 million cap, and they think that will mean that a lot more people will be able to get those fuel vouchers. As I said previously, the big problem with shifting these things is that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're basically taking money from one part of the industry initiatives pot to give it to another. And in this instance, it's taking money away from energy advice, benefits entitlement checks, energy efficiency measures to increase this sort of debt support, financial support. And this is sort of what on balance, what we think of each of these things. So on the left are the questions in the consultation. So the first two on the left are to do with the debt write-off from suppliers. And we agree with what BEIS are proposing here. We think that the overall cap of 6 million, so sort of increasing from where it would have been, is proportionate to the problem, and that the £2,000 personal cap will ensure that money goes further in helping more households. We think it's really important that £6 million can help more households than in sort of broader in a broader sense than just going to those households who are the most severely indebted, that can and should be getting help more directly from their supplier. So we think that's a proportionate approach to the problem. In terms of the additional vouchers that they're proposing to go to those who qualify for core and broader group, we welcome the intent from BEIS, but because it will mean that other parts of industry initiatives will essentially reduce in size, reducing the level of funding that they can get, we find it difficult to support it. And that's because our analysis shows that energy advice, income max, and energy efficiency measures are all pound for pound much more valuable to households than a rebate, especially in the longer term. So on average, income maximisation results in thousands of pounds more for households. Energy efficiency measures, we all know, are the best long-term strategy for combating fuel poverty. And energy advice is low cost and high value to households as well, often resulting in high differentials in price that comes from energy switching. So we think that although we agree with sort of the first half, the sort of debt clearance from suppliers, the 6 million and 2,000, we don't agree with the approach that BEIS are taking on the second half. And that's really just because there's not enough money in the scheme to go around, and really does show the need for the broader reforms to look at industry initiatives, increase the funding there, to consider how the debt clearance part of that can be increased, as well as the other really important stuff that happens through it as well. The last question at the bottom here addresses a further eligibility criteria that comes with the financial assistance. So currently, there is a criteria that customers receiving that assistance must be living in communities wholly or mainly in fuel poverty. We agree with this proposal, as it will keep the scheme focused on fuel poverty, and it is explicitly from government a fuel poverty focused scheme, so we think that is pretty sensible to keep it. But something that's the sort of important to us, and something that we think that the scheme should reflect, is that the definition of fuel poverty and the measure of fuel poverty should not be conflated. So the government often talk about the definition of fuel poverty being the sort of low income, high cost metric that is used to work out how many households, or to estimate how many households are in fuel poverty. Now, that isn't the legal definition of fuel poverty, which is essentially someone on a low income who struggles to keep their home warm because they have higher than average energy or high energy costs. We think that they should go to the legal definition of fuel poverty because it's a bit broader, a bit fuzzier around the edges. And that will keep it more consistent across the nations, because different nations have different metrics to estimate fuel poverty. So in Wales, they have a 10% metric, as they do in Scotland, with a few extra things as well. But having that more qualitative definition would make it more consistent across the nations. And of course, the warm home discount is a whole of GB scheme working across Scotland, Wales, and England. So yeah, broadly, we agree with that proposal. Okay, so something else that BEIS are looking to do in the consultation is try and work out how industry initiatives can support the smart meter rollout. And this is really important. So throughout the pandemic, we've seen how useful smart meters have been, particularly for those households that use prepayment as their payment method. So there's been a stark contrast between those with legacy prepayment meters, where they're sort of coin operated, and smart meters in prepayment mode. So those with legacy prepayment meters faced a really stark choice in that first lockdown period, and presumably will be facing a similar stark choice as well, especially where they're clinically vulnerable, of when they run out of credit, to either go to a shop to top up, potentially putting themselves at risk, or to stay at home without having topped up in the cold and dark. Really acute over winter, much more acute than in the summer, and we think this could be a really big problem. We looked at it quite extensively in this year's fuel poverty monitor, and unsurprisingly found that 95% of respondents to our survey of frontline advisors said there was a moderate or high risk of more households cutting back on their energy use due to being forced to spend more time at home. And the 88% of respondents said there was a moderate or high risk of self-rationing among prepayment users forced to spend more time at home due to the crisis. I think there's some of that is due to affordability issues, but some of that is due to the sort of technical topping up issues that I've talked about there that can be fixed with smart meters. Now, of course, not every year there's going to be a pandemic, but I think it just really shows the value of smart meters in a really strong way. So the question that BEIS are posing is, do we agree that in addition to energy advice about the benefits of smart meters should be provided, as long as reasonably practicable to every customer benefiting from an industry initiative? And we agree with that. We think that will help to accelerate the smart meter rollout for vulnerable groups. And if it's done in the right way and is standardized, it could be really sort of useful in ensuring that more vulnerable households, and especially those with prepayment meters, have access to a smart meter. We do have a bit of concern that this does need to be standardized. So we'll be adding that into our response as well. But we think overall this is a really good idea to try and accelerate that rollout for those groups. It's worth noting that we don't think that this is all that could or should be done to try and accelerate the smart meter rollout for those groups. It's one part of a puzzle, but it's something that would be useful. So they also are consulting on standards to energy efficiency measures. This is a bit more straightforward. So currently, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, the energy efficiency measures that are funded through industry initiatives do not have the same required standards of installers as other government schemes, such as ECO and the Green Homes Grant. So BEIS are proposing to rectify this in the regulations in the law. And they also would like to see boiler installations be accompanied by technical monitoring to ensure that they are installed properly. So the first two questions are really about the standards on the left-hand side of those. So firstly, about whether boilers and central heating systems, the installers should be covered by Trustmark. And secondly, whether installations of boilers in high-risk properties and central heating system in all homes should be installed in accordance with PAS 2030-29 and then 2035, 2019 from the 1st of April. So short answer is yes, we agree with them. It pretty much brings warm home discount into line with the other schemes, and we don't see any reason why the sort of standard of installation shouldn't be in line with ECO and the Green Homes Grant. It would be a bit strange if it wasn't. In terms of the technical monitoring, I think we agree with what BEIS are trying to do here. They're trying to ensure that everything's installed properly and the households are getting what they've been told they're going to get. But we don't think it's proportionate. We think that it's usually really expensive to do this. It's really hard to tell if something has gone well without a really good baseline as well. And that's really hard to get from our experience, is a really good baseline of how usage has been before intervention and then after. And also user behavior is really hard to predict and build into the sort of monitoring and the model that's being used. So it tends to be really expensive to do that sort of thing. And as I've said a few times, any money that's spent on anything new within these proposals takes away from stuff that other stuff that could be happening, like the income max, the energy advice, and other things. So we think that whilst that is sort of ideally you would do that if you had all the money in the world, it's not proportionate. It'll be too costly and would likely reduce overall support to households. So it might be one for the future with an expanded scheme, but not one for the current spending envelope. This is a bit more tricky. So I think, as you'll all be aware, we're seeing more and more failures in the energy market from suppliers. And what I mean by that is where suppliers essentially go out of business. And there's a process called the supplier of last resort process that happens when a supplier goes out of business. And that basically is the process that defines where those customers move to, which supplier those customers of the failed supplier moves to. Unfortunately, when that process takes place, the warm home discount obligation doesn't really follow it. So if a supplier has a group of customers that should be in receipt of the warm home discount, and it's gone through all the core and broader group processes, and before the payments are made, it goes out of business, it loses its license to operate, and therefore loses its legal requirement to provide the warm home discount. The new supplier taking them on can elect to pay that warm home discount payment to them, but there are a couple of blockers to doing that, and they don't have to do it. So BEIS don't look to entirely rectify this in this consultation, because they believe it would mess around with the market dynamics. But they want to make it easier for new suppliers to take on that obligation through enhancing everyone's reporting on their warm home discount activity, so that the new supplier taking them on can find it easier to understand what the commitment was and whether they can honor that commitment, and allowing overspend of the scheme if taking on customers. So broadly, I think we really, actually no, we fully support these proposals. It's a really good idea to ensure that more suppliers who are taking on those customers can honor warm home discount commitments. And they do tend to do that at the moment, but with more financial pressure on suppliers, it could be more difficult. But we do think that the 10% overspend that they propose within the consultation might not be enough. They haven't evidenced where that 10% comes from, and we want to make sure that that would be enough to sort of cover the promises that failed suppliers have made to their customers. So we're not going to say that there is a number that's right, but we want BEIS to look at it and do sort of the analysis to ensure that that number can help the new supplier cover the old supplier's obligations. I think that if we weren't so short on time and we weren't so worried about this legislation being passed for the 1st of April, we would be talking about broader reforms so that there was a legal requirement to honour that payment somehow. But that would be a huge risk for the passing of that legislation, I think. So I think this is proportionate, and this is a good way forward from BEIS, and actually a really good idea to ensure that the scheme works for more people. Next, the supplier threshold. I mentioned at the start, so that every supplier with more than 150,000 customer accounts has an obligation to provide a warm home discount. NEA has long argued that that threshold is too low. So we argued it was too low and it was 250,000. We argued it was too low and it was even higher than that. And whilst we still believe this, we think that there is a case that lowering it further could have an impact on the passing legislation. So we in our response, we're making the point that we still believe that all suppliers, all licensed suppliers, should have the requirement to offer the warm home discount, but that might be for the broader reforms. And the last couple of questions that BEIS ask are on the future of the scheme. So earlier in the presentation, we set out our vision of the future of the scheme, and there's a link there to go through to the paper that we set out with Fair by Design, which looks at that in a lot more detail. But what we're saying here is that we will set out in our response everything that we set out in that consultation. Those four bullet points there, that more households need to receive the support, everyone to receive it automatically, industry initiatives portion to be maintained, and level the rebate to be at least equal to the current scheme. Some of the things that BEIS are asking about in the consultation are a little bit worrying to us, and we don't agree with them. So the two things they look at is based on the differences between England, Scotland and Wales, and the difficulty they have with there being different metrics for fuel poverty in those countries. So different measures of fuel poverty. We have low income, high cost in England, we have a 10% measure in Wales, we have a 10% measure with a few caveats in Scotland. So BEIS have looked at what changes they could make in different national schemes, and whether supplier thresholds the separate schemes should be the same in England and Wales and Scotland. So NEA does not support separate schemes for different nations at all. We think it would significantly add to the complexity of it. It could offer loopholes for delivering at lower levels. So basically with fewer rebates, especially if there were different thresholds for different countries. And ultimately, the complexity that would offer would mean that it was harder for households to navigate, not just the one-home discount, but the market, harder for advisors, to energy advisors, to navigate the market and a one-home discount on behalf of those households as well, and actually harder for everyone to communicate what's going on. So whilst we sort of understand the thinking from BEIS to look at England, Wales and Scotland in a different way, we think that the complexity that would create just makes it not proportionate, not worthwhile, and that it's better to keep a whole GB scheme in mind, and that BEIS should really be focusing on making the scheme fairer, so that everyone who qualifies for a rebate gets it, as we've stated multiple times today between myself, Carl and Peter. I think that might be my last slide. I'm happy to go for a break, or I'm happy to start answering questions. I haven't seen any questions in the chat as of yet. But if people do have questions, then please put them in the chat or put your hand up, and we can come to you and we can try and answer them as best as possible. But yeah, myself, Carl and Peter, I think are more than happy to answer any questions that any of you have at the moment to aid you with your responses. I see Matt has raised his hand, so I'd be more than happy to take a question from him.
Sorry, Matt, to interrupt you. Should we give it a few minutes, just three or so minutes, just for folks to perhaps put questions into the Q&A, and we have a bit of a break. You have a breather. That was a fantastic overview, and you must need a drink of water. So let's just give it 3 minutes, and then we'll come back for some questions. And if you guys could, if you've got any questions, put them into the chat function. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
We won't forget your hand, Matt.
I think, oh, it's great to see that we've got questions rolling in. Thanks very much for that. We'll just wait for Matt to rejoin us, and then we'll get started on the Q&A. Fantastic. Do you want to have a first go at answering the questions? If you want to hand over to us at any point, Matt, then please do if they're not indicating who they're directed to.
Yes, so first one I think I come across is from Helen Card, who asks, when you mentioned debt write-off, is that through the likes of Charis or is it something else? So I'm not aware of what Charis do. So it might be worth you explaining that, Helen. Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry, you're still on mute. I don't know if we've muted all participants.
I might be able to unmute you.
Am I unmuted now?
No, you're fine now. That's good.
Right. A lot of the big energy companies have their own funds that you can apply to get debts written off. It usually comes under the umbrella of Charis, but it's like the British Gas Energy Trust, EDF have got their own fund, npower. Then I'm just wondering, is that when you're talking about the industry initiatives and where they write off debt, is that where they're writing off the debt through Charis, or is it something completely different?
Yeah. So, sorry, I used to be a trustee at British Gas Energy Trust, so I can answer this question. So, yeah, Charis or British Gas Energy Trust, alongside other trust funds that are run by some of the biggest suppliers, are one way that fuel debt write-off can be applied for, either through individual applications or as or through organisations that provide that support through third parties. Yes, that's one aspect of it. Other organisations provide that support as well, and that is the cap that that Matt mentioned earlier. That £6 million cap was due to go decrease in size, so fewer direct fuel debt write-offs. But given the circumstances, the government have decided that it's inappropriate to reduce the scale of support through fuel debt, so they're keeping that cap at the same level as it is for this current year.
Okay, just because I work for Newcastle City Council, and our team make a lot of applications for the grants, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to actually get the grant and to get debts written off. So if it's already at 6 million, I would hate for it to go any lower, because it's already really hard to get the grants. Noticeably harder than it was even just 2-3 years ago.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Helen. Thank you. We'll take that on board, and I think that speaks to the fact that the overall amount of activity for fuel debt has been decreasing, so it must be getting tougher to get that assistance. So noted on that.
And next, there's a comment from Emma Lower that just talking about sort of a debt clearance scheme. It's been worked on with Plymouth Energy Community, which looks interesting. Providing lending funds to remove fuel debt, moving to a cheaper supplier, and using those savings to pay off the loan. That looks really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that, Emma. And the next question is from Charlotte Laws. So what the initial rationale was for the £140 level. That might be a bit before my time, Peter. Do you recollect what the original rationale was for that?
Well, it used to be low. I think initially it was £115 or £120 when the warm home discount scheme first started, and that was supposed to correct the supposed differential between households that were able to switch and those that weren't able to switch, and that was broadly the premium that that was associated with that. Since then, the rebate itself has been subject to it's supposed to have been subject to inflation and increasing in price as a result, but this is the first year I think that they've actually acted upon the inflation increase, and instead of increasing the individual rebate value, they've decided to assist more households through the broader group. But that was the original rationale for the payment value.
Next question is from Helen again. So why is the extension being looked at for only a year? It's a good question. So I think that it's because they want to make bigger changes to the scheme, but it basically got too late in the year to do so, to sort of get the legislation through to the 1st of April. So it's already quite tight with a scheme being proposed that is virtually the same as the current scheme. If they were to make the broader reforms that they want to make, it would really risk delivery of the scheme in the early part of next financial year. So I think that's the reason they're doing it, and I think that's why we can expect another consultation before too long.
Yeah, I suspected as much, because it's for some of our clients, it's an absolute lifeline. And I would hate to think that it was only going to be for one more year and then that was going to be it. As I say, it's the difference. It makes a huge difference to some of our clients.
Yeah, completely agree. I don't think we've seen any indications that BEIS want to stop it after this year, that scheme year 11 extension that's in this consultation. I think that all indications are that it's going to carry on after that.
Right.
The next question is from Joel Lewis. Hi, Joel. So BEIS predicts the number of people in receipt of pension credit will remain roughly the same between the current and next scheme year. Is that our view, or other orgs' view as well, given the current difficulties in providing in-person benefit advice? I honestly don't know. I don't know if you've got a view on that, Peter.
Yeah, well, we obviously know and we support a lot of the work that AGK do around this, but we know that a huge amount of households that are entitled to the guaranteed element of pension credit don't claim it, and we have for a very long period of time supported AGK's and others' calls for there to be a really big push on benefit entitlement, particularly for pension credit. So those figures that the government are predicting are based on a sort of a standstill associated those that are currently eligible for the guaranteed element of pension credit still providing it, and sadly, you know, some of those households that would have been receiving it will have passed away, but that will probably be offset by the sort of a newer intake that some of the outreach that your organisation and others might help to compensate for, but it doesn't take account of a big push on benefit entitlement, which is what we would want to see. And I think your question is referencing some really stark times in terms of being able to resource and fund some of that activity. And I think that underlines the value of income maximisation in regards to the industry initiatives component. And that's one of the worries that we have about one area that could be squeezed if these other reforms to the industry initiatives come in.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, I think it's a really interesting point. I think obviously most advice organisations know the difficulties in providing benefit advice at the moment, even if they can do that on the phone, just because of capacity is limited, and particularly over the next month or so, with, you know, resources going on, maybe just helping people to get shopping in, or just helping with more emergency measures. We hope, I mean, at the moment we're trying to make the case for that in conjunction with the campaigning work we've been doing linked to free TV licenses for the over 75s, because that's required, you know, that's now a requirement for you to get a free license for you to be in receipt of pension credit. So we hope that DWP will recognise this, and there'll be more funding for local organisations and local projects. But obviously we know times are tight, and so to think, you know, I'm sure those in the advice sector, you know, will think of the benefits that they do to help increase that take up, and I'm just not sure how realistic that can necessarily be over the next 6 to 12 months or so.
We'd love to see the BBC doing a big campaign on that, given that they're, you know, the changes that's going to have for poorer pensioners that can't afford a license. A big push from them on benefit entitlement would be very welcome and rational.
Yeah, that's something we'd definitely like to see, and I think we are trying to work with the BBC behind the scenes to make it easier for the process for people to apply for the TV license, because obviously we know that is, you know, it's a small but still significant thing that people have to fund now, as money is tight, and also just in terms of the logistics of applying for that benefit and applying for the license if you're not online as well.
And also, it's a qualifying benefit for the new Green Home Grant as well. So, if you're able to get a householder to take up that entitlement, not only do they receive an automatic rebate off their energy bills of £140, a free TV license, but they can also get their home made more energy efficient up to the value of £10,000. So, it really is worth doing, and a clear focus on that.
Great. And the next question is also from Joel. So, are there still restrictions on energy scheme redress funding being used for warm home discount advice? Now, I'm not sure I completely understand that, Joel, unless you do, Peter.
I just remember being in a event where it was a presentation given, I think, to the Fuel Poverty Coalition, and saying that because it was seen to benefit suppliers, that money from redress funding scheme was not allowed to fund advice sessions that would reference warm home discount scheme, because maybe it was felt that if that advice was saying you can get the warm home discount scheme, it was seen to, well, that person's now going to stay with that supplier. So it's money that's taken from a supplier being fined by the regulator, and then it's potentially used as an incentive for that customer to stay with that particular supplier.
That's right. Still the current state of play that you can't leverage those two sources of funding together. The only exception to that is fuel top-up vouchers, where you are able to look to deliver assistance from the warm home discount scheme in concert with redress funding. And the reasons for that you've just described. And the fact that they believe it would be offsetting an obligation on a supplier and perhaps giving them a reputational benefit, despite the nature of that source of funding being derived from a fine for enforcement action.
So I was just wondering about people's views on that, whether people think that'd be something we could potentially lobby to change, given that the benefits that we obviously are hoping that warm home discount scheme would bring, and advice on the discount being kind of a holistic part of energy advice that organisations here today would deliver.
I think it's finding poised. I think the arguments are finding poised. I think pragmatism trumps kind of balls at the moment, just in terms of being able to get support out to people, and we need to perhaps confront some of the sort of shibboleths that there have been, but yeah, EST are the administrator of those funds and have set those restrictions, so I think it would be a direct line to them to query the logic of that and then potentially pick that up with Ofgem, but we can have a think about it.
Sure, thank you, Peter.
And then the next question was from Matt. So re-debt write-off, sorry. Do we know how much is written off outside warm home discount? So believing that some use credit balances and there is also some voluntary write-off. So I'm not sure I've ever seen that reported. So I personally don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if, Peter, you've ever seen that reported, but I don't think it has been. I don't think it's in the Ofgem vulnerability report.
I haven't seen the latest figure. I've seen figures previously in the impact assessments for indicating the rationale for it reducing, because at one point that was by far the biggest component of industry initiatives. So I think a couple of years ago there was quite strong reporting on it within the impact assessment, but I think you're right, it's not included within the Ofgem social reporting.
So I'm just wondering, guys, so coming in on that, because we would accept that industry initiatives isn't the right place for that to come from, really, but then also it's crucial that consumers have got access to that debt write-off. So I'm just wondering whether we can allude to, and I know you guys have got a policy call around restart schemes and thinking about, what's the best mechanism for debt write-off. So I'm just wondering if there are things that we can flag there that say, look over there, that's how it should be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our consultation response will highlight some of the options that we've been highlighting to government over recent months. to give you a couple, Matt's already mentioned one of them. I think the proposal for there to be a debt matching scheme introduced by the UK government. And trying to bring forward some of the breathing space legislation to reduce the impact of debt, and look at that as an opportunity not just to create a piece of legislation which looks at breathing space, but look at that as an opportunity to bring forward a coherent package of support. More generally, funding debt advice. Or continuing to fund debt advice support in the way that the Chancellor did earlier on in the year with was it £37 million going into debt advice, continuation of that funding and getting longevity around that funding, given that it's likely to be just a drop in the ocean, and complementary policies alongside sustaining universal credit up ratings, and improving the application process for things like fuel debt, fuel direct and water direct, and that type of thing.
Okay, we've got a question from Helen again. So, who is measuring the success of industry initiatives in terms of energy efficiency advice, benefits advice, etc.? So, there has been a qualitative assessment of this. So there was a warm home discount evaluation that was done a few years ago that looked at the qualitative benefits of these things, but I haven't seen a quantitative analysis of it, either through sort of putting a value on it or trying to put a social return and investment on it. I think we can only speak of our own experience at NEA, and certainly the numbers that come back from the benefits entitlement checks team are that it's just a phenomenal value to the households that receive that support. The average value being, I'll just check so I don't get this wrong.
It's in excess of £1,000.
Yeah, in excess of £1,000 is a completely life-changing amount of money.
Yeah.
And
year on year.
I don't think we have the values for energy advice, but certainly there's a lot of money to be saved from switching, and the cost of providing advice is relatively small compared to those savings. So it doesn't take a very high hit rate to get there. And in terms of energy efficiency measures, I think we all know that energy efficiency is generally excellent payback, and especially for the sorts of people or the sorts of things that are getting replaced within industry initiatives. So really old boilers or boilers that aren't working, there's a sort of huge benefit in it. So whilst I can't give you any like solid figures for the whole scheme, qualitatively it's of huge benefit, and from our own work, where we've tried to put numbers on it, we think it's a big benefit as well. Sorry if that's a really rubbish answer, but
no, that's fine. And I just wanted to just nice to know that, or reassuring to know that it is actually being sort of monitored in some way. Yeah.
One of the things that we're keen to do, and it's the right question that you've asked, pressure on the scheme administrator Ofgem to evaluate the schemes and look more at less just about the compliance data, how many people have you assisted commensurate with your total obligations, but look at the outcomes that have been achieved. I don't know, Carl, whether or not you want to comment on this, given the nature of your conversations with Ofgem about trying to make sure that the overall way that we approach industry initiatives provision is more inclusive.
Yeah, so that's a good point, actually. I mean, I will tend to agree with the idea that much more measurements of outcomes can help, us as organisations who are more than just interested in this, but interested in this, seeing this work and seeing what parts of it need to change from a kind of empirical measurement as well. So many more kind of metrics for what works, what good looks like, good practice. That's all to the good. But one thing that we did want to include in our previous work and our previous document on the warm home discount was having industry initiatives inclusively designed, and that is on the principle that inclusive design of all services kind of works around people's actual lived experiences, and it is not assuming that people live in a particular way, or is in the design process is biased towards the designers rather than the beneficiaries. So I still think that there's a place for talking about and understanding how we design some of those initiatives through an inclusive design lens to make sure that the beneficiaries actually benefit from it, rather than the design being on, design tends to be around better off people, middle class people. The processes for those for lots of schemes and lots of products and services tend to have some certain biases in mind. So inclusive design, I think, is a good lens for this work as well.
Just fun thing from my perspective on that is we were fortunate enough to be given a small amount of money by SSE and British Gas to evaluate our industry initiative schemes last year, and that was all about trying to make sure that there were the kind of customer journey was sort of front and center of that evaluation, to understand, the sort of entry points for people into these type of schemes, and our kind of offer back to them about what we can advise on. And some of those learnings, whilst that's gone back to the funder, has gone back to SSE and British Gas, and a lot of the kind of detail of the content has to be kept sort of confidential for those reasons. We'd be happy to share a flavour of those, just to give you an indication of the sort of direction of travel in terms of NEA's offer, particularly around our warm and safe advice service.
Hopefully that answers your question, Helen.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So from Joel, about targeting. So the impact assessment says that only 20% of warm home discount recipients are in fuel poverty. So how do we ensure the scheme is better targeted, which will help ensure its longevity as it is meeting its intentions? I think it's a good question. I think it's really difficult. I think as I mentioned before, there is this conflation between the metric that is used to estimate levels of fuel poverty, whether it's low income, high cost, or 10%, and the legal definition of fuel poverty, which is a bit broader. And I think that 20% is an estimate of the estimate. And it is really difficult to sort of verify that, I guess. I would think that there's things that can be done to look at the broader group, to make sure that the broader group is doing what it should be doing. But I think that you really need to be considerate of all the nations and making sure that actually you're applying a principle to not just meet a metric, but to make sure that people can heat their homes. And if you look at the fuel poverty strategy as well, it's not just trying to aim policies at people to try and get that metric down, but also trying to address vulnerabilities in a broader sense. And something that sort of came out of the fuel poverty strategy consultation last year was a greater focus on medical vulnerabilities. I think that the broader group sort of does that relatively well, and that might not be captured by the fuel poverty statistics necessarily. So I think, in answer to your question, there are some things in the broader group that can be tweaked to get it better in terms of what Bayes report, but actually personally think it's better than 20% in the qualitative definition of fuel poverty. Do you have anything to add, Peter?
No, that was all good from my perspective.
So from Francis, the vouchers provided for customers ineligible for core or broader group receipt of warm home discount. How is eligibility for vouchers decided, and how are they distributed? So eligibility is what I mentioned before. I don't think I was quite clear when I was going through the slides. So the eligibility for distributing those vouchers currently is that household is living in a community that is wholly or mostly in fuel poverty. So it's quite a broad definition, but it boils down to really struggling to keep their homes warm and is on a low income. and how are they distributed? So I think they're distributed by the scheme partners. So initiative projects are delivered by scheme partners such as NEA and others who are on the call, and it's those scheme partners that sort of manage the distribution of those vouchers. One from, did you have anything to add, Peter or Carl, to that one? No? Okay, from Elisa, the practicalities. So we are going to create a template response to make it easier for any of you who sort of wouldn't usually put a response in to put one in, and that will cover sort of the main points that we've gone through today, but in quite a brief way, so that basically you'll be highlighting that you agree with NEA if you do. We'll also share relatively early our full response with you, so if there's more detail that you want to pinch, you can chuck that in as well. But really, I think the best way to respond is to look at the template, check that you agree with everything, just add your organization's name in where we suggest, and then you send it into Bays at the relevant email address, and it should be as simple as that. And hopefully that will make things easy for everyone. Yeah, James, that's a really useful comment. I think Peter's alluded to it in the comments as well, but the LEAP program that James suggests, and he's got a website there, has some outcomes figures as well, which is fantastic. I encourage people to look at that. So another one from Joel. So educated advisors say it's tricky for third parties to apply online for the Warm Home discount on others' behalf. Have other orgs had similar issues? I'm just going to check down. Yeah, so I agree with Peter there. So clearly that's part of the digital exclusion premium, and I'd encourage you all to, if you hadn't listened to it already, then there's a session from our Warm Homes Week that focused on digital exclusion, where we go into sort of that sort of question in detail. So if you go onto NEA's YouTube channel, the Warm Homes Week part of that, you should be able to find that quite easily. But yeah, look forward to seeing if there's any other comments down below that. That's James. Yeah, I think that's the last question we've got at the moment. So I don't know if anyone else is busy sort of typing away, but maybe we'll give it another minute or so. But
can I just pop in? Sorry,
yes.
on Joel's point about the digital exclusion, I think, again, not to sound like a broken record, but this is all the more reason for where inclusive design and inclusive design principles comes from, because the assumption, we know it in all aspects of our lives, there's an assumption that we're all digital by default now, and many of us here are, but a lot of people aren't, and obviously that means that outcomes for those people, and obviously the digital exclusion crossover with other vulnerabilities is quite close as well. So if you are excluding people who can't access digital services, then the impacts on that group are all the more. So yeah, it's another reason for why services, schemes, initiatives, etc., are designed around people's actual lives rather than on assumptions.
Thanks, Carl. I think it's a good point. I was just going to say, we've been doing some analysis work looking at older people's use of online activities over the pandemic, and there's not actually been a big uptake in more people going online from what we've seen. So it's really just those that have been able to go online have, and obviously those that haven't been able to, and that means they're missing out even more than they were before, because offline options are much more limited and capacity is much more reduced, and so that really serves to disadvantage particular groups, and that's not just older people, but those that just don't have access to online, whether they have a disability or due to low income, or if it may be. And I think it kind of speaks to the data matching side of the discount scheme has been obviously very beneficial, but maybe that doesn't always necessarily target it as well as it could do, because whilst it targets people on certain low income benefits, it doesn't necessarily target those in fuel poverty just due to their housing situation or due to their health condition.
I think it's certainly the case that data matching more payments would help address that digital divide. I think that's a really important point, that you know, in many ways, the virtue of that system is that people don't need to even know that the scheme exists in order to get help, which is part of the challenge. We factored in the digital premium at something like £350 per year for energy customers alone, not you know, other utilities, but just energy customers alone. So if you're unable to switch to the best deal, you're unable to apply for the warm home discount scheme, you're unable to get paperless bills, that all soon very quickly tots up, and we put the average at about £350.
I wanted to ask, do you know, is there a way of identifying those that may be in receipt of benefits but aren't on the energy account? Because I think there's something in the consultation document about how those maybe receiving qualifying benefit, but they're not the account holder or named on the account, and they may not be able to benefit from the scheme.
Yeah, so this is the write out to the 200,000 people that that applies to. Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in Asia UK's view about the adequacy of writing out to people to make them aware of what the next steps are. If you've got any information on what you'd like to see in that context, John, that would be really useful to share that with us.
Thank you. I'll have a think about that, Wilson.
Can I, because I think we're coming towards the end of the session now, can I just underline the fact that how useful it would be to submit a response, particularly trailing the extension and expansion of the scheme and the longer term options that we've highlighted. If, without getting into any complexity, you're able just to highlight the value of the work that you currently do, particularly if it's funded through industry, be immensely useful in of itself. No more than that, just sort of say we're from this organisation, we get funding from industry initiatives, it's vital that it continues and that there's clarity about the longer term nature of that support. That would be just immeasurably helpful. So thanks very much for your active participation in this event. I found it really useful in terms of developing our own response. I'll hand over to Matt and Carl now to say a few words before we close.
I'll just reiterate what Peter said. I've found this really useful. It's useful to get a bit of challenge and a bit of back and forth with everyone. So that's really helped us sort of shape our response too. In response to Matt, the last question that we haven't addressed yet. When do we expect to share the template response? I think in the next couple of days. So we've got a draft one. We'll consider what we've heard here and sort of adapt it, and we'll send it over to you so you have pretty good time to mold it to your own needs and to submit it. So hopefully that works for everyone. And any last words, Carl?
Just to reiterate and echo, really, this has been really, really useful. Fair by Design, where I work, we cover a cross range of markets, but energy is clearly the very most important one for us. It's where the exposure to the poverty premium is highest for low income consumers. And so, you know, just not being introduced to organisations who are working in this space is very useful for me, but also to see where your thinking is with regards to this very important scheme. And you know, if we're all speaking from one voice on this, you know, with bits of differences here and there, that's all to the good. So really, thank you ever so much from me.
In that case, I think we're done with questions now. Thank you everyone for attending. Thanks for Peter and Carl for giving the introductions and helping with the questions. We'll get out to you soon with some more information and hope it's been useful. Have a nice day, everyone, and don't think too much about the elections.